All right, so we also need to look at looping constructs, or constructs that allow you to basically repeat the same code over and over and over again until we reach a certain point or a control variable says that we don't want to do that anymore. And so there's really kind of in the language, there's three types of loops that you'll see most often. The first is called a while loop. And the while loop is great when you don't know how many times you want to loop, including maybe you don't want to loop at all. It's possible. Excuse me. A do while loop is very similar to a while loop, except that with a do while loop, you're always going to iterate through the code that's in your loop block at least one time. And then a for loop is really nice when you know how many times you want to loop. And so what we're going to do in this video is we're going to step through each one of these. We'll do some very simple examples with these. The idea being just to give you a really good idea of how the syntax works and semantically what's going on, that sort of thing. So let's start at the top here. We'll start with a while loop. What I have here is just a very simple line of code that's just going to say generate a random number between 1 and 6 and store that value in the variable x. And suppose we wanted to continue looping until such time that x, again, this is kind of like simulating rolling a dice, or rolling a die. Suppose we wanted to keep rolling until we rolled a 6, and once we rolled a 6, we wanted to just let ourselves know, or just we wanted to print out how many rolls it took before we actually rolled a 6. So we could do something like this. So we could say while x does not equal 6, we want to do something inside here. And what we want to do is we want to just increment a counter, right? We want to count the number of rolls, but in order to do that, we need another variable. We can call it count, and we can initialize it to 0, or we can initialize it to 1, since we're going to automatically do this roll for the first time. And then what we want to do is we want to increment count every time we run. Count plus plus is the same thing as count equals count plus 1, just in case you haven't seen it. Okay, so what we're doing now, or what we have so far, is we have declared a variable called count. We initialized it to the value of 1. The reason we initialized it to 1 instead of 0 is because no matter what, we're going to generate a random number between 1 and 6 and assign it to the value of x. So we're always going to roll at least one time. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and start our count at 1. We're going to check and see, the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to check and see if x does not equal 6. If x does not equal 6, then what we're going to do is we're going to increment our count, and then we need to roll again, right? So I'm just going to copy this code over. And then we're going to assign a new value to x. So then what we'll do, x will get some new random number between 1 and 6 right here. We're going to come back up to our while loop. We're going to say, does that new random number equal 6? If it does, then we'll drop out of our loop, and then we can simply print our message to the user, right? It took rolls to roll a 6, right? Let's see what happens. 10 rolls to roll a 6 in that first try. Second time, we rolled it the first time. Rolled it the first time. Took 9 times. If we want to make sure that what we're seeing here is good, we could add another print statement in here, right? You rolled whatever stored in x, right? So let's run this. Maybe it'll make it a little bit easier to see. Okay, so let's step through this. Let's step through this again. So we initialize a variable called count. We initialize it to 1. We create a random number between 1 and 6. We store that value in x. In this case, the first number we rolled was a 2. So x is equal to 2. So we're saying here, while x does not equal 6, well, x is 2. If 2 does not equal 6, that means this resolves to true, which means we're going to drop inside of our code block here. We're going to print you rolled a 2, which is what happens right here. We're then going to increment our count, so now our count is going to have the value of 2 in it. We're going to generate a new random number between 1 and 6, which incidentally is going to be a 3. We're going to say if 3 does not equal 6, we want to do what's inside here, which is true. 3 does not equal 6. So we're going to print you rolled a 3. We're going to increment our count, which will now be a 3. So count is started at 1 and now it's 3. We're going to generate a new random number between 1 and 6. We're going to roll another 3. It's going to be stored in X. We're going to check and see if 3 does not equal 6. That's true. So we're going to stand here and do it again. We're going to print you rolled a 3. We're going to increment our counts. Now we're up to 4. We're going to roll our dice one more time. And you'll notice that this time, when we do our comparison, we don't print what we rolled again because we rolled a 6. 6 does not equal 6. Well, that's false. So we're going to drop out of our while loop. We're going to come down here. We're going to print it took 4 rolls to roll a 6. Okay. So that would be a while loop. That's a very kind of simple example of a while loop. If we wanted to do the same thing with a do while loop, it wouldn't really look that much different. The syntax is a little bit different. However, the effect is very much the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out this stuff for now, just so we can ignore it. But I'm going to reuse some of it. So with a do while loop, you have the keyword do. You have an open curly brace and a closed curly brace. And then we have our while at the back side of it. So, and the interesting thing about this, which is different than the other looping or the other while loop, is that there's actually a semicolon at the end of this while statement. Now we still want to loop as long as x is not equal to 6, right? Because we're going to keep rolling until we roll a 6. So we'll leave that the way it is. We still need our 2 variables that we're tracking here. So we can initialize count and x. We can actually do this inside of here. And what you'll see here is you'll see a problem, right? It's going to say, once I get rid of that, it's going to say, I don't know what x is. The reason it doesn't know what x is because we declared x inside this code block. If you declare a variable inside of a code block, it's only visible inside that code block. So when we're outside of that code block, our program has no way of knowing what x is. So what we need to do in this case is we need to declare x on the outside. Okay? And then we can just use it when we're inside the loop. Okay? All right, so what we're saying now is we want to initialize our counter to 1. We want to initialize x, or declare x. And then we're going to assign x a value. We're going to say x equals some number, random number between 1 and 6. We then want to increment our counter. Actually, in this case, we probably want to initialize to 0. We're going to increment our counter. We can print our number again. So we can see what we got. Right? And this is it. This is doing the exact same thing as what we did up here. We're going to increment. We're going to start at 0 because we haven't rolled until we're inside of our loop. We're going to initialize x. Then we're going to say we're going to do whatever's in these brackets as long as this condition is true. So if we drop into our loop and we get a random number between 1 and 6, we assign it to x. Suppose we rolled a 3. We're going to increment our count. The count will become 1. We're going to print that we rolled a 3. And then we're going to check and see if we rolled a 6. Does 3 not equal 6? That's a true statement. So we're going to go back inside of our do loop and we're going to do it again. So if we run this, I guess I should make this a little bit easier to see. Plus that was a lot of rolls. I don't really want to go through that many. And so what you can see here, notice a little bit of a difference is that because of the way we implemented it, when we do roll a 6, we actually are printing that we rolled a 6. But the count is still correct. So there's 3 rolls here, 3 numbers here. The 6th roll was a 6, and so our loop finished. So this is a do while loop. Again, you have a control variable, right? You need to make sure inside of any looping construct that you have some sort of control variable that's governing the way that your loop works and how it works. And generally speaking, you need to make sure that that variable is being modified inside your code block. If it's not, you can end up with something that is going to run forever and ever. If you never changed a value or a variable that's inside of your condition for your while loop or your do while loop, it is really easy to run into infinite loops or flaws in your logic, that sort of thing. So this could be considered sort of a control variable for the loop. Right? So that's a do while loop. Again, it works very, very similar. All right, the last loop we'll talk about is called a for loop. And again, I'm just commenting this stuff out for now, just because I don't want it to run when we're looking at this lastly. So for loops are really good when you know how many times you want to loop. And by that, I don't necessarily mean that you know I want to loop 6 times, or I want to loop 3 times, or I want to loop 100 times. For loops are good when you know how many times you want to loop, in the sense that you can figure out programmatically how many times you want to loop. The easiest way to kind of illustrate this is if we wanted to, for instance, just print um, a character of a string on one line at a time, right? So let's do this. String school equals University of Richmond, right? Suppose we wanted to loop through this string and we wanted to print U on one line and then N on the next line, I on the next line, that sort of thing. Well, we don't know how many letters, at least I don't off the top of my head, how many letters are here, so I can't say I know definitively how many letters are right here. However, I do know that there's a function that will tell me how many letters there are, and that's called the length function. String has a length function. Strings have a length function that you can use. And so what we'll do is essentially, we know that how many times we want to loop. We want to loop for the number of characters that are in the string, which you might say we want to loop for the length of the string. Now, for loop starts with the keyword for. It has a parentheses. There's no semicolon after the parentheses in this case. What you're going to do here is you're going to initialize your control variable as the very first thing. Oftentimes you'll see this as I, and you assign it a value of 0 or whatever you need to initialize it as. In this case, we want to start at the beginning of our string. If you recall, the strings in Java or indexing in Java is always 0 based. So the U here is actually the 0th index of the string, and would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So we're going to start at 0. The next thing, and you have a semicolon after that, the next thing you want to do is basically describe how long you want to loop. So it's the equivalent of this comparison. And what we want to say is as long as I is less than school, if we use that dot operator on a string, there's a length, school.length. So as long as I is less than school.length, we want to keep doing whatever's inside of our code block. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to modify our control variable. In this case, we're just going to increment it by 1 each time, right? We're going to start here at 0. We're going to print U. Then I will become 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. So we're still going to have a code block beneath our for statement. And all we really want to do in this really simple example is we want to just print out on each line. We can print school dot char at an index, right? Where is our index going to be stored? It's going to be stored in the variable I, right? If we run this, just to kind of show you how it goes down or how it actually ends up working, hit play, then you'll see that we get University of Richmond. Right? So what it has done is it has looped through this entire string, and every time it loops through, it's printing a different character. Unfortunately, because my camera had issues, I can't. I would love to sort of trace this with you. I'll try and do it up here, and hopefully it won't be too confusing. Let's see if we can do this. Again. Actually, you know what? Let's do this. Let's get it a little bit shorter of a string. So let's say monkey. How about that? All right. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to track the variable I, and then I'm also going to just make it very clear for you guys so we know what we're talking about. So the length of monkey is what? It's 6 letters, 6 characters are there, right? So the length is 6. However, if we look at the index, we're going to see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So M is at index 0, O is at index 1, N at 2, K at 3, E at 4, Y at 5. But the length is actually 6, right? Okay. So whenever we see school.length, really what we are seeing is the number 6. Okay, whenever we see I, we're going to look at whatever value is stored in our variable I. And when we say we want the character at a particular index, we're talking about this index and which character it corresponds to in our string. Okay, So let's step through this one thing at a time. So we declare a variable called school. It has the value of monkey in it. The length is 6, right? When we hit our for loop, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to initialize our variable called I, which I've already kind of added up here, and we're giving it the value of 0. The next thing we need to do is we need to see if I is less than or equal to, or I'm sorry, if it's less than school.length. If it's less than school.length, then we're going to do what's inside of the code block. Well, I is 0, school.length is 6, I is less than 6, or I'm sorry, 0 is less than 6, that's true. So we're going to come in here and we're going to print school.character at, char at I. Well, what's I? I is 0. So we're going to come in here and we're going to print, let's move this over so we can see it. We're going to print M. So our M prints, right? The next thing that happens is we come up here and we increment I. So I is no longer 0, I becomes 1. Okay? Then we're going to come back to this inequality again and we're going to say is 1 less than school.length, which is 6. 1 is less than 6, that's true. So we're going to do this again. So now this time when we print, we're going to print the character at index I, which now is 1. If we look at the 1 index, we're going to print the O in monkey. So the next thing that prints is O. We're going to increment I. I is going to become 2. Is 2 less than 6? It is. We're going to print the character at 2, which is going to be N of monkey. We're going to increment I. I is going to become 3. Now we're going to say is 3 less than 6? 3 is less than 6. That's true. So we're going to come inside and print the character at index 3, which is going to be the K. We're going to come back up here. We're going to increment I, which is going to become 4. Is 4 less than 6? 4 is less than 6. So we're going to hit our code block, and we're going to print the 4th index, which is E. We're going to come back up, increment I. It's going to become 5. Is 5 less than 6? That's true. So we're going to go back inside of our code block again. We're going to print the character at index 5, which is going to be the Y. We'll hit I again. We'll increment I. I will become 6. We'll say is I less than school.length? School.length is 6. Is 6 less than 6? It's false. So we would drop out of our for loop, and then we could continue on execution down through here. So those are the 3 loop types that you'll see very commonly inside the Java programming language. You can nest loops inside of loops. You can have for loops inside of for loops. You can do all kinds of interesting, crazy things. But for now, just for getting the basics, these are the way that the loops work. These are the syntax. And you have kind of an idea of which loop to use in different scenarios or situations, depending on what it is that you're trying to do.